All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody to our fourth part of Dialogues on Gender Identity today. We will have with us today Kyler Brodus, Ann Duncan, and Harper Jean Tobin. Jameson will not be able to join us today.
And get that going. It's Pat Bailey, Director of Training. These, again, are presenters. Part 4 description is here. In terms of what we're looking at for this section, looking at culturally competent allies. So we're going to look about the workplace and how to create that environment through transition plans and things like that.
And I'll jump in.
There you go. Thank you, Ann.
No problem. So our first topic today is workplace issues, and we're going to talk about the bad and the good. So we're going to talk about transphobia and trans inclusion. So we'll start with a definition, sort of a working definition of transphobia. So it's fear of trans people, fear of difference, and fear of change. So all those people, all those things, come together to be what we call transphobia. And one of the interesting things about transphobia, when you think about it, is that there's a very tight linkage between transphobia and homophobia. Because for the most part, unless someone is seen in an intimate situation, or it is known to someone that that person is gay, lesbian, or bisexual, the signals that people use, that gay bashers in particular, folks who don't know someone, use to harass them and validate their aggression, are around gender. So when people see others who are non-conforming in their gender presentation, they assume that they're gay, lesbian, bisexual, and so that ends up being very tightly linked to the issue of transphobia. Because it's really about gender presentation, not sexual behavior. So in terms of workplace issues, transgender people are very concerned about the fears that their managers may have, from their direct manager all the way up their management chain. They worry that they might be unsupported by their managers. They worry about being fired for being trans. They worry about being demoted. They worry about not being promoted. But they probably don't think about the fact that their managers have all sorts of fears too. So, managers often have fears about having trans people in the workplace, which manifests itself as transphobia. And it's often about not knowing what to do, not knowing how to behave, and not knowing how other people in the workplace are going to behave around the trans person. So, generally speaking, management fears, while occasionally coming from homophobia and other issues, are really about uncertainty. And so one of our goals is to try and eliminate that uncertainty that causes management fears. Coworkers, are the same, right? Trans people are probably as worried about the coworkers, or even more so, than the coworkers are worried about them in many cases. Trans people worry what their coworkers will think, that they won't be friendly, that they'll stop speaking to them, that they'll be harassed or ridiculed, maybe even hurt in some cases, in extreme cases. They worry that their work will be sabotaged or that people will refuse to work with them. But the coworkers themselves have fears. and just like the management fears, those coworker fears tend to be about the unknown. I don't know how to behave with this person. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why they're doing this. And all that uncertainty and all that questioning causes them to be fearful. And obviously, all this fear in the workplace is not healthy. There's a lot of business impacts associated with transphobia. First of all, when people are afraid, when people are worried about things other than doing their job, productivity just goes through the floor, right? If everybody's standing by the water cooler talking about the person who's transitioning, they're not paying attention to doing their work. And they're uncomfortable. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to behave. So they're uncomfortable. They act awkwardly. Even if they're not hostile to begin with, they act awkwardly. That feels like hostility, which creates more discomfort, and it becomes a reinforcing loop, which eventually turns into an incredibly toxic work environment because everybody's hostile with everybody else, and often they don't even understand the root cause of the hostility other than that someone was transitioning, so they must be the problem. So, that has tremendous impacts. The loss of resources and talent, the amount of effort that's used to manage the situation of transphobia as opposed to actually helping the employee be successful in the workplace is huge. And it also impacts customers. So LGBT customers are often invisible when they come into a workplace to purchase something, or when they're in a remote location, when they're buying something from you, maybe when you go to their home. They're invisible to you, but they can see the behavior in the workplace, and they can get signals about the biases. So they, as an invisible minority, they can see your bias towards other behaviors in the workplace. They can see potentially your biases towards them and your behaviors, and they're going to be sensitive to your bias. LGBT customers are going to be more worried about biases than your other customers, and they may be concerned about your judgment in cases where they are voluntarily doing business with you. They may stop doing business with you. In other cases, for example, in a medical situation, they may withhold information or hide because they don't want you to know certain things about them. They may be worried if you're in a situation where you could have a legal impact on them. They may be worried you'll take away their children or things like that. So those biases in your workplace show up and make it harder for you to do your job with your constituency, and potentially impact their lives and their productivity, as well as your own workplace. So there are, of course, other impacts that are more far-reaching with your own staff. Turnover is one of them, and the cost of turnover from employment discrimination are quite high. According to one study, the cost of replacing a departing employee was somewhere between 93% and 200% of that salary, that person's salary. And that's a pretty common estimate, that it's going to take you at least a year, if not 2 years' salary, to replace someone. So recruiting a new employee can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 for an hourly employee, or as much as $200,000 for an employee who's making $100,000 a year. So that's a huge impact. If you have people leaving you because of transphobia, either the trans folks or the work environment is so hostile that other people are leaving, it's a tremendous cost to your business, not only in the cost of replacing that person and recruiting them, but also productivity, getting them up to speed. All that impacts that. Obviously, if there's serious transphobia, there's a potential for litigation, which is expensive. And more these days, these things make it to the news, and it's a negative impact on image and reputation. Our society is much less tolerant of discrimination of all sorts, and tend to take a very negative view of companies that are dragged into court or have bad publicity due to discrimination for LGBT people, which is a big shift and very good for us, but very bad if you're an employer in that situation. So more and more Americans do assume that transgender people have protections, and therefore that just adds to their intolerance of discrimination. And in fact, in more and more jurisdictions, as we showed the last workshop, there are more rulings and more laws that are supporting transgender employees, either through direct legislation or through the result of litigation. So that's the negative side of the coin, but what value comes from trans inclusion? Why should I be inclusive of trans people in my workplace? So first of all, you have the ability to tap the creative potential of a huge talent pool. So companies are more and more going after top talent, and in a lot of industries there's a shortage of talent. There's a mismatch between the workforce and the employees, and so if you are in an industry or a job that has a shortage of employees, as an employer, you can't afford to ignore people just because they happen to be LGBT or T. And so it's very important to take care of those situations and hire the best people and retain the best people, which means you need to have an inclusive workplace so those trans people come to you and want to stay, and you can get that top talent, and that they can be more engaged. So you can have, if you have an inclusive workplace, those top employees you bring in will be 100% engaged, and they won't be worried about the gossiping around the water cooler and whether that's about them. And then obviously they will also stay. If it's a good workplace, it's not hostile. Trans people tend to be very loyal to an employer who takes good care of them because there are so many bad experiences out there. So a trans-inclusive workplace can be a huge boon as an employer to keep some very top talent who are going to be very grateful and very productive and supportive. Being trans-inclusive is a huge opportunity for marketing and sales, just like LG&B. It's a growing area for marketing, and again, just like their loyal employees, trans people are going to be loyal customers too. If you speak to them and embrace them, they will be there as part of your customer base. And finally, you can improve customer service. If your customers feel comfortable, if they want to come back, if they want service, if they want to be honest with you about your situation, you can take better care of your customers. So, every employee deserves a safe workplace, and in fact, the law requires and obligates employers to make sure that the workplace is safe and free of harassment. And a safe workplace improves employee morale. So if others see their coworkers are treated fairly, all the workers will feel safer and have a higher level of morale. So it really is truly, a win-win. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyler.
Ann, thank you very much. Great job. I am now going to move you to slide 16, which looks at the most successful Fortune 50, 100, and 500 companies and how they rate the CEI, showing in 2012 80% of the employers rated provided protections based on gender identity or expression, which is the highest figure to date, which is extremely great. 33% include health insurance coverage and benefit, which is an improvement. We obviously still have a ways to go. And then in 2012, 35% offered voluntary disclosure of sexual orientation and gender identity on HR surveys, which is also an important thing to do for people to feel inclusive by being included on surveys and not excluded. And then finally, most U.S. headquartered businesses, 66% of those that operated outside the U.S., including many countries where homosexuality is criminalized, still provided no legal protections against discriminations on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So that's a huge area that obviously needs to be worked on and looked at. Moving to our next slide, slide 17 here. That's not a good read, but you can find the CEI, and that's a good place to show you all the companies. And I believe that it can be found at, and if my colleagues can help me, www.hrc.org is one place to find it that gives you a listing of these companies. All right. We are now going to look at some transition guidelines and moving to slide 18. First, we look at, for transition guidelines, a couple of tools that would be helpful for HR professionals to be aware of. The HIGBA, or Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association Standards of Care, and then the newer, or 7th edition version of the standards put out by WPATH for healthcare of trans people, which have changed significantly the way that transition is done. And so it's very important, obviously, to have a good understanding of transition for people to assist them and be allies in the navigation of the transition. So moving us to the, the next slide, we're going to talk about the purpose to provide safe and effective pathways to achieve lasting personal comfort. There has to be a way to make employees feel safe, not only the person transitioning, but also the other employees in the workplace. Everybody has to be on the same page, and so it's a way to get there. What is new and what's different? Tone, what professionals need to do, then emphasize on what the clients need to do. So there's a different approach than just looking at what the client needs versus what your organization needs. Also, the need or the standards provide flexibility, so there's more recognition of uniqueness. There used to be this cookie-cutter version of the way people were supposed to transition, which was never true, and then has been more and more dispelled by people coming out. That everybody is unique, and everybody has unique issues when doing their transition. There are more detailed clinical guidelines, which there weren't in the past, and there's more than just providing hormones and surgery. It's about the overall health and well-being of the individual, and it's not about the focus on just the medical stuff, which society has done and former employers have. New sections, e-therapy, voice and communication, and intersex individuals, which are individuals that are not necessarily trans, but there's more information on that and standards of care as well, which are people that have ambiguous genitalia or some combination thereof, for lack of a better way to put that, and different sections on voice and then e-therapy. And then there's lots of references and then clear statements that gender nonconformity is not pathological. In previous sessions, I'm sure we've shared that it's, the American Psychological Association and the AMA, the American Medical Association, have indicated that, this is a condition that is treatable, if you will. Did I kind of just move through without switching slides? Key to changes to flexibility, I'll just hit on that again, is that not everybody's transition is the same. Everybody is unique. So when timing, all those sorts of things are important for people and how they feel comfortable going through the process. When people want to announce those things, and we're going to hit some more specifics when we move through towards the end on how to do that. And then acknowledging the role of making informed choices and the value of harm reduction. In other words, allowing that person to feel empowered to make choices with the support of you and the company. That's not disrupting the flow for anyone. Gender, slide 23, gender nonconformity, as we already said that, it's not pathological. Sorry, I just kind of start talking, which is the way I do in my classes, and forget to follow the outline when getting to talk about an issue. And then moving to our next slide. Oh, I guess I could do a little bit better here. Gender nonconformity is not the same as gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria has been classified as a mental disorder, not necessarily as a lifetime diagnosis, which I think people have made a negative stigma for folks. Transsexual, transgender, and gender nonconforming individuals are not inherently disordered because one has a different gender identity or doesn't conform to what societal expectations are, doesn't make it a disorder. The distress of gender dysphoria, when it's present, is a concern that might be diagnosable and for which various treatment options are available. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, existence of a diagnosis for such dysphoria, maybe access to different health care and further research for treatments that an individual might need. So, and clear statements that it's not an absolute requirement that there is a need for medical intervention as well. Some people actually can transition on the job and not need any sort of medical intervention. They may just need other support or resources to navigate the climate in the workplace. which is usually the issue. And then finally, everybody has a unique identity and the way we express it. So when treatment is sought, treatment is designed to align those within that person to make them feel more comfortable, and hopefully it has success over the long term. And I'm sorry, I'm not reading the slide, but previously it used to be that the only attempt was to align. It wasn't successful in the past to just align people and make them congruent with their birth sex that they were assigned. Or I'm not reading that correctly. Let me start over and forgive me. Treatment aimed at trying to change a person's gender identity expression to become more congruent with the sex assigned at birth has been attempted in the past without success, and particularly in long-term situations. Such treatment is no longer ethical, and that's why I was saying that treatments are more aligned to what that individual needs. So I guess I did say that, but I just wanted to clarify and clean that up. So now it looks like I will be handing over to Harper Jean, who will be taking you through the next part.
Thanks very much, Kyler. And I think that piece that Kyler just explained provides, I think, a lot of helpful context for understanding what it means to transition. But it doesn't necessarily, the standards of care, of course, don't tell a manager how to support somebody going through transition. So I want to talk a little bit about what the strategies are for managers and for allies in the workplace. First of all, I just want us to do a quick poll. Has your organization had an employee transition on the job? Not sure, yes, no. I'm not sure what not applicable is in this context. Okay, so we have a number of responses. So most folks said yes, and we had a no and a not sure. And I just want to quick do one more, and that is, can you say, at least the folks who said yes, the transition in my organization went well. And from your, oh yes, Pat points out that if you are not in a company of any kind, they're not applicable. So say whether how you feel about how the transition in your workplace went. Was it handled well by the management? Was it responded to well by the workforce? How did it go? So most folks say that they agree that it went well. So that's really good to hear. In fact, everybody that except the person that said it was not applicable. So that's a really, really positive, wonderful thing to hear. In terms of effective strategies, a few sort of principles and starting points. It's really important for managing a transition to have management in the company set the tone clearly. And that means that the first thing that needs to happen is that when somebody is transitioning, if management doesn't have a clear plan, a clear set of principles, a clear tone to set, then they need to make sure to do so internally, make sure they know what their policy is and that they're going to be fully behind it and set that clear tone. And to express, part of setting the tone is expressing or adopting or reiterating your policy around zero tolerance of discrimination and harassment in the workplace, and also providing training for employees that covers not only discrimination and harassment, but different aspects of cultural sensitivity. We think yearly training helps to reinforce this tone of inclusion and these principles of inclusion to everyone. It helps show that the employer is proactive in its steps to prevent harassment and discrimination. So training, policies are important to set a clear tone, and to have a policy that really outlines the steps that will be taken to resolve any issues that come up of harassment or other kinds of issues. These policies can often help to reduce, if not prevent, problems in the workplace. The tone should be one of respect for all employees, reflecting the employees are the most valued resource, and there should be some flexibility in developing the policy. Now, when we say that, flexibility shouldn't mean not having a policy. It should mean having a policy with the ability to tailor it to the circumstances, and particularly to the situation and the needs of the employee who is transitioning. Not everybody is going to want to sort of deal with things on the same timeline or deal with things in exactly the same way, and we'll get into some of how that might look. Communications are really an essential first step. Figuring out, first the employee has to communicate to somebody that they're transitioning, and then there needs to be decisions made about to whom else in the company and outside the company it may be necessary or not necessary to communicate about it and what to say. In some instances, transition, it's appropriate to communicate about it to some set of employees. In some circumstances, maybe even all of the employees, say in a very small company, and in other instances, it's better really kept confidential. The right strategy is going to depend on the workplace environment and culture, the personalities, and the quality of the working relationships that the trans employee has. Some companies do this in a way where they have a written communication that is sent around by management but written by the employee who's transitioning. Others have a letter coming from a senior manager or the CEO that clearly communicates the management's support of the employee. Some folks will use company meetings or will meet with people in small groups. Sometimes in those meetings they will have the transitioning person present, sometimes not, and there are advantages and disadvantages to each of these approaches. One of the most important things is that the employee who's transitioning feels supported, and that other employees who work with that person feel supported as well. Everybody should understand the trans employee is valued as a member of the team, and that management welcomes diversity in the company, but it's also really important that the trans employee be included in the decision-making process around who is being told what, how, and when. Many folks will want to communicate personally with their supervisor and immediate coworkers and leave it at that. Other people will want to address it more directly and broadly to sort of head off any questions that might come up. There are situations in which HR diversity management may be the last to know that do you have a trans employee. I'd invite folks to raise your hand if you have communication strategies that you found to be of particular value that you might want to share. We could also get into that in Q&A. In terms of strategies around specific issues, obviously one of the most important things that needs to be communicated, that needs to be addressed, is just the respectful communication to the person who's transitioning. What will be changing or won't be changing around names, pronouns, really simple, and we've talked about it before, but really critical to somebody feeling included, supported, safe in the workplace. And it's important, I think we've also mentioned this in a previous session, that because not all employees have a strictly male-female gender identity or gender that they're transitioning to express, that some employees may prefer gender-neutral pronouns such as the singular they. Instead of he or she, you would say they. As an English major, I can assure you that's totally grammatically okay. When somebody transitions on the job, pronoun slips will happen from time to time. You worked with somebody before and are used to calling them she, and you understand that their male identified, they're transitioning, you should be referring to them as he, but you make a mistake because of the habits and the patterns that we have in our brains when we interact with people. So it's important to distinguish between those occasional slips and things that are intentional and disrespect. An employee who's having an attitude of, I'm just not going to recognize that you are transitioning and who you feel yourself to be. Obviously, that's a big difference, and it's important to distinguish between the two. Managers should and the transitioning employee should understand that those kind of slip-ups happen sometimes. They can be uncomfortable for everybody, but it happens. If somebody is really being disrespectful or harassing somebody, that obviously is different and needs to be addressed. We also know that a lot of transitioning employees will have thought long and hard about how to address issues around which restroom they're going to use. They may be very apprehensive about addressing that with management or what issues are going to come up with coworkers. Sometimes managers are concerned that, or the transitioning employee may be concerned that other coworkers are going to be very uncomfortable or even, in a worst case, hostile. In the very unusual case, but something that managers sometimes worry a lot about, is the non-trans employee who's going to make a complaint or is even going to sue the employer over the fact that they are, quote-unquote, letting the transitioning employee use the restroom appropriate to their identity. So back 11 years ago, there was a case out of the U.S. 8th District Court of Appeals where this happened, where a woman transitioned from male to female on the job. The employer said, okay, you're transitioning, that's great, you use the women's restroom. There was another woman on the floor who was uncomfortable with that and who actually sued the employer, saying as a non-trans woman, it was a hostile environment for me that I had to share the women's room with this transgender woman, and that it was a hostile environment based on her sex, and that it was a hostile environment based on her religion because it was inconsistent with her religious beliefs to be sharing a women's room with a transgender woman. The woman who sued acknowledged that she could have chosen to use a different restroom or maybe go to a different floor of the office building, and she never claimed that the trans woman who had transitioned had said or done anything inappropriate other than to be there in the women's restroom. So in that situation, and this is just about the only case that we have about somebody suing over something like this, the court said that those circumstances alone don't even meet the threshold requirements to be able to go forward with a discrimination case, because there was no harm, no adverse action towards the employee who was upset, and so therefore the case was dismissed. In preparing for this session, one of the things that Kyler mentioned was that in European countries, often the public restrooms are not segregated. And many more businesses here in the U.S. are finding that it isn't difficult to have gender-neutral restrooms, particularly if they're only single-user, and to allow employees in any case to use the facility that reflects their identity. This is an issue of safety and privacy and comfort for everybody. Often employees will miss this and they'll think only about the perspective of the non-trans people for whom this change in restroom use by the trans person is a new and unfamiliar and maybe uncomfortable thing at first. And this is one of those key issues where the employer setting the tone really lessens and heads off a lot of problems. So it's a key area for the employer to lead. It's also important to recognize, we have this cute little graphic here, but it's also important to recognize, that the fluidity of what it means to express your gender in the workplace. For example, we all, make to some extent fashion choices day to day that may be slightly different, and employees who are trans or not trans, may dress a woman may dress more in a more stereotypically feminine fashion one day and in a more casual, gender-neutral suit the next day. And that doesn't mean that she is or isn't a woman, whether she's trans or not, right? But sometimes when somebody transitions, there's a little extra policing that goes on of whether they're fitting into the stereotypes for the gender that they've transitioned to, and therefore whether they're, are really that gender and should be respected as such. Obviously, in the workplace, the focus should be on professionalism and not on gender stereotypes, and particularly not on holding transitioning employees to a different standard than you would other people of the same gender identity. Additionally, as I mentioned, some folks have a core identity that is neither male nor female, and their gender expression is going to reflect that. They may or may not be transitioning in the sense of changing their names or pronouns. They have the right to be supported and included in the workplace for all the same reasons that Anne discussed, as those who make a more traditional female to male or male to female transition. So those are some of the major issues that comes up. I'm going to get into in a few minutes how those are addressed by managers and how allies can be supportive around them. But I wonder if anybody wanted to. I wondered if anybody now or maybe later in Q&A can identify other kinds of issues that may need to be addressed by management in the course of a transition. So feel free to raise your hand on that. And for the next few slides,
it's Anne. I'll take over.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Anne. Thank you.
No problem, Jean. Thank you. So we're going to really shift gears a bit, although it's all very connected, and we're going to talk about allies. And there's two little graphics saying awareness, legal perspectives, limitations, and you. I don't know if we'll hit all of those, but we will try and talk a little bit about what it means to be an ally to transgender people. So we're all very familiar with the concept of allies. We find ourselves as someone who's an ally to others, and we find others allies to ourselves, both in diversity work and, frankly, in your daily life, where people build informal alliances all the time to accomplish things. Basically, we're going to talk about coming out as allies as our starting point. So, we all hear about coming out when we talk about LGBT people. But allies have to go through a coming out process as well. And, from our perspective, say you're LG or B, from your perspective, an LG or B person, you've had lots of people come in as your ally, and you've come out as LG or B. But maybe if you're, but you may not have gone through the process of coming out as a trans ally. So there's things that one needs to do in order to be successful coming out as a trans ally. And there is a process that you're going to go through to do that. And so we'll go ahead and talk about that on the next slide. Excuse me. We'll talk about steps on the slide. So there are 3 steps in the ally journey. The first step is awareness. And so this is sort of like becoming consciously incompetent, if you've ever heard that phrase. So you go from being unaware that there's a problem to becoming aware and saying, oh, look, LGBT employees or trans people, in this case, are treated differently. And then you decide, I want to learn more. And so you start the journey as being willing to learn more, becoming a listener, becoming a friend, being open-minded to learning about the trans community and how you can be a friend to folks who are transgender. And then you move on to the ally phase. And in the ally phase, you're really coming into your own as a partner. So you've got your own opinions, and you're starting to generate the ability to speak up. You've maintained your commitment to personal growth for some period of time to move from awareness to ally. And you've worked to overcome, that is not a well-written sentence there. You've worked to ensure that each person is treated with respect. And you've joined others with a common purpose. And in this process, to this point, you're probably going to go through some personal growth to get here. that we talk about the coming out process as an ally. So, for example, as a LGB person, you may have to struggle through the idea that someone might think you're trans because you're an ally of the transgender community. Just like a lot of heterosexual people say, well, I don't want to come out as an ally because I'm afraid that people are going to think that I'm gay. And so people who are allies to trans folks have to go through that same process. And so that personal growth is really required to become a full ally, to move into your comfort zone as an ally. And then people move beyond being an ally to being an advocate. So that is when you really start being proactive and use your position to leverage and to advance LGBT workplace rights. Use that to include LGBT focus in your strategic planning and whatever you do. So if you are, for example, if you're in the LGBT ERG and as an advocate for trans people, you're including trans issues in your strategic focus in that LGBT organization and not marginalizing that group and maybe even making them the center of your work if at this point in time that's where the focus needs to be. And you can do this in your job, your community, and your personal life, and often as people become advocates, that becomes almost seamless as their advocacy moves throughout various parts of their life. So how would you rate yourself as being a transgender ally? A whole continuum, including not applicable if you are not an ally. So if we go ahead and fill out the poll here. So, well, look at that. We got lots of advocates on the phone, which is excellent and not shocking because you're on the phone here and you're interested and advocating for LGBT people and for transgender people in particular. So we have a couple more slides on the impact of allies. So what we find in the workplace is that the closer someone is to you in your workplace, the bigger impact they have on your workplace experience. So allies are really important to transgender people, and the most important are their coworkers and their direct supervisor. So people they interact with every day, if they are allies, those folks will have a better work experience as transgender people than any other group of people. So senior management obviously has policy impact. Obviously other LGBT employees can be a safe haven. But really when you get right down to it, the coworkers and the direct supervisor are what makes someone's work day either enjoyable or miserable. And so that's a really, really important point for us to remember as we work with transgender people in the workplace. So I want to get down to some really specific things as an ally or an advocate for transgender people, things that you can do in the workplace. So first of all, recognize and deal with your own prejudices and fears. Right? That was the personal growth that I was talking about. So if your issue is, I'm afraid of being identified as trans, or I don't understand why someone would go through that process, whatever those issues are, you need to deal with those. You need to ask the questions of the right people, and the right people is an important part of that. Do your research, read your books, whatever you need to do to help you move beyond your own prejudices and fears. Of course, don't assume everyone who's gender nonconforming is transgendered or transitioning. There are plenty of people who are gender nonconforming who are perfectly happy with their cisgender and have no intention of transitioning. So, now that you've become aware, just because it looks like a duck doesn't mean it's a duck. So make sure that you're not making those assumptions. Don't assume everyone identifies as male or female. More and more people, particularly younger people, are choosing none of the above. Right? They want to identify as a third gender or no gender. There are a variety of different ways and choices people make, and it's important to honor all of those and not discount anyone for doing something that may not seem normal to you because it's normal to them, and it needs to become normal for all of us. If a transitioning employee is changing their name, you need to respect them and use that new name. Just like with gender pronouns, people do slip occasionally, but apologize and move on, and people will understand that. As long as you don't continue to do it for years, right? There comes a point when people will stop being understanding. you should refer to people transitioning using the pronouns they prefer, and if you don't know, it is okay to ask politely and respectfully and say, as you're talking to someone, I'm sorry, I know you're transitioning and I'm not sure what pronoun you'd like me to use right now, and they will answer you. In most cases, people will not be the least bit offended by that. If there's a sort of formal process going on and a manager who's responsible, you certainly could go to them instead. But most trans people would not be offended by a respectful question. So don't avoid the topic of transition with a coworker if they've been open about it, but don't ask inappropriately personal questions. It's sort of like someone who's pregnant, right? They're perfectly reasonable to ask when the baby is due. If you know a person is pregnant, it's always dangerous if you don't know they're pregnant. But you probably don't want to ask about what procedures they've had so far. So same sort of thing. Don't use a level of appropriate social behavior when talking to people who are transitioning, but don't ignore it. We talked about name and pronoun slips. Don't dwell on it. Just move on. And just because you know someone is transitioning or has transitioned, particularly people who have transitioned, does not mean that everyone else knows. So don't out someone. If you're aware that they have transitioned and it's something that they've discussed with you, it's okay to ask them if other people know, if it's general knowledge, but don't assume it's general knowledge. And if they tell you it's not general knowledge, then you should expect that you are holding privileged information, and you should treat that appropriately. Just like a lot of LGBT people, even today, a lot of LGBT people aren't out at work for various reasons, and we try and respect that for people and not out them. Same thing. Take the opportunity to educate others. When people are inappropriate, confront it. Don't let people get away with negative and inappropriate behavior just because the transitioning or transgender person is not in the room. And then obviously an ally or an advocate behavior is working through equal protections and benefits, not just talking about it. So some more strategies. We got lots of strategies to take home and think about. So don't assume there's a right way to transition or express one's gender identity. We've talked about this a little bit throughout the 4 sessions. But I think that there used to be a you do this, you do this, you do this, you're done. And now people make all sorts of choices in all sorts of orders. They go through what people consider traditional transition process, or they do part of what people would consider a transition process, or they just change their gender expression and their pronouns. So it's not for us to judge that choice. It's for us to understand that choice and support it. Don't apply stereotypes of how people should dress that you wouldn't apply to others. That's also been mentioned. Sometimes when people start transitioning, we get very, very sticky about how they should dress, and the rules are no tighter, for a transitioning employee, and in fact should be a little more lenient for them than they are for anyone else in the workplace. And we talked about on the previous slide about responding to negative talk, and even more so, don't place the burden of responding to those reactions on the trans employee. It is far easier for an advocate or an ally to stand up for someone than for them to stand up for themselves. Certainly if they try and stand up for themselves, you should get out of the way. But if you see something and they're there, and you should feel perfectly comfortable to advocate for someone and tell someone that that is not appropriate behavior and support that employee. And then just remember that you should deal with this employee exactly the same way as you would in any other situation. So don't treat them differently or in a special way just because they're transitioning. So let me see if there's anything else we haven't covered. Because like Kyler, I sort of expanded my thoughts. So I think we've pretty much covered what's on the slide except talking about customers. So, their customers are different than the rest of the employees in the workplace. You often don't have the ability to tell a customer what to do. So, you may have to tread softly with customers. You certainly should set expectations with customers about how they treat your employees. And if you have a transgender employee, and a customer is not treating a transgender employee appropriately, then you may want to eliminate the interaction between that employee and that customer so that everybody can be happier. And that's not always necessarily the employee's first choice, but it's difficult at times to protect an employee from a customer, so sometimes separating them is the best solution. Under no circumstances should you let a customer harass or bully one of your employees just because they're a customer. So on that note, I am going to turn this back over, I believe, to Kyler.
Actually,
I
think it's me.
Harper, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Harper Jean.
Thanks,
sorry.
So that was great, Ann. And I want to sort of come back to management. And at the point where management is creating a plan to support an employee's transition, hopefully they've kind of done some thinking and learning, and are prepared to really be allies and to be advocates themselves, just in a way that Ann had discussed. So hopefully that's the case, and then they're sitting down to try to create a plan. They need to decide who should be involved, what resources are they going to need, who is going to be talking to who about what, and ideally a transition plan should be developed by people who are culturally competent, who have some understanding of the issues. It may be that because the company is in a process of learning about these things, there may not be folks on staff who kind of have that knowledge. It may be helpful to bring skilled and trained professionals in as consultants to help develop this plan. As with a lot of things, the employees who are most impacted, particularly the transitioning employee, should be involved in this process. In developing a plan, there should be a clear point of contact and in an indication of safety or privacy of the employee wishing to transition. So what that means is both that in creating a plan, you should know who is a person that somebody should talk to if they're going to transition, and who is the person that somebody else in the company should talk to if they have a question that's related to this. Employee resource or affinity groups can help provide some internal support. They may or may not be a source of internal expertise to develop on this. And in the process of putting this plan together, it may be helpful to provide training for appropriate groups of people so that they can be at that level of competence where they can actually be responsible for developing and implementing a plan. Some things to consider in a plan. We talked about what some of the issues are. Start by asking, the management can ask the transitioning employee, how can you help? They can identify the stakeholders, who the stakeholders are, right? The managers, the transitioning employee themselves, their coworkers, particularly the people that they work most directly with, clients, customers, or vendors, other third parties that they may interact with personally. You'll want to define both relevant terms and concepts in a transition plan, and so that everybody just knows that they're using the same language, talking about the same things, and define what the rights and responsibilities are for the transitioning individual and for the company. So we talked before about handling the issue of communication. How would the employee like the team of folks that they work with to find out about the transition? In writing from them, in writing from management, face-to-face, in different ways, etc. Will there be a need for workspace changes? Often not, but there may be situations in which an employee may prefer to move their exact workspace, or may even feel a need to relocate. That's something that may need to be discussed. And you'll need to think about how long certain functions, certain HR functions take. So if somebody is changing their legal name in your software, or their in software that you use to deal with things such as benefits or employee directories, there may be some of those things that need to have reflect a current legal name, and that may take a certain amount of time. There may be other things that can and should be changed, possibly even before an employee has a legal name change, and you need to figure out how long it's going to take to actually implement that, so that you can time things appropriately, and so that somebody hasn't transitioned at work, but they're still listed under the old name in the company directory, which obviously can create some confusion and discomfort. You want to discuss and agree how best to inform clients, which clients need to be informed, and how to inform them. And if the transitioning employee has any professional licenses, things like that, you will need to assess any changes that might need to be made to that. Is that something that the company needs to help with in some way, or that the employee is taking care of by themselves? And, of course, assessing, does the company have a dress code? Is the dress code gender specific? How does that play out here in terms of the employee's dress and appearance at work? A lot of that ties into the issue of setting a timeline, and there may be different steps in that timeline. Often the very key one is the time when the employee will transition at work, in the sense of they're coming to work, dressing and using the name and pronoun and so forth that's consistent with their gender identity. Ideally, at that time, they're going to be treated according to their gender identity for all purposes and be listed as such in all the right places. But to make that happen, you have to sort of back up and identify the dates that need to happen before that, the dates that you're going to notify key people or have conversations with key people, the dates that you're going to put in motion changes to directories, name badges, and so forth, so that when that transition on the job start date happens, so that everything else is in place as far as communication and logistics and so forth. So setting a timeline becomes important. Again, who do employees talk to? Is it an immediate supervisor? Is it human resources, who they may feel more comfortable talking to simply because they don't work with them as closely and may feel less awkward? That's a sort of thing that it's really good to have set out before somebody comes to you and says that they're transitioning, to have something in a manual where they can actually know who to talk to. You can, think about and talk with the employee what kind of other support they might need, whether there is an affinity or employee resource group to connect them with, what kind of training might need to be done for management, for employees, and that might mean bringing consultants in to do a trans-specific training. It may mean incorporating new content into regularly scheduled training that covers other topics. But again, you'll want to think about that timeline relative to making the environment ready for the sort of start date for the transition. Some other considerations. Again, setting tone is really important. The transitioning employee needs to hear from management, and everybody else also needs to hear the management support. If coworkers or managers have concerns about the transition or concerns that just happen to come up during that time period about anything else related to that employee, it needs to be you need to make sure that that's communicated separate from, we support you in this, but we have a question or a concern about how this one particular aspect of communication or something like that is being handled. You want to clarify that the employee is covered by the existing policies on non-discrimination, and also their policies on transition if the company has them written down. Again, communicate that to the employee and to other people that this is being done handled pursuant to company policy. Make clear what conversations are going to be confidential, especially ahead of that transition on the job start date, because the employee, it's going to be obviously a very big concern that until there's a plan put in motion about who's going to be told what when, that they feel like they can reach out to people confidentially for guidance. You want to reach agreement on restroom use. It's important that the employee keep an open mind and look at things from the transitioning employee's point of view as well as from other workers' point of view. Discuss, pronoun use. Again, typically these things coincide with the date somebody's going to be starting to dress and present themselves as that gender on the job. Something that may or may not change is how the transitioning employee's partner is referred to. That's something that comes up sometimes as well. And whether the employee needs to take leave. Now, that may involve they need to take leave for medical procedures, either around the time of the transition on the job or at a later date. Again, that's different for everybody. It may be that the employee wants to take some leave or use some vacation time, sort of right up before leading up to the start on the job date. If that would make them more comfortable, that's something that may be considered as well. So those are all things that you may consider, and I don't think that's even exhaustive. But what I hope I make clear is these are all things to talk about. It doesn't have to be that hard if management and the transitioning employee and whoever else they need to bring in to support them in this, they sort of go through those issues systematically and with the values that we've discussed in mind in terms of supporting the employee and having an inclusive workplace. Come up with a plan that suits the needs of your employees, that suits the needs of the situation of the company, and that make sure that there is an equal and supportive workplace.
Great job, Harper and Ann. Now we have some time left for action planning, next steps, and I know we have a question out there. We may have a couple other questions out there, but I think we had, what I think I would ask everybody is what is their next step with their employer in pursuing, if they haven't already, a transition plan or some sort of, or whatever next step or action they would like to take.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute Roberto, if you want to go ahead and give me just a second. Da-da. Okay, Roberto, I've unmuted your line, so if you want to go ahead and speak to that, that'd be great. Roberto, you're probably still on mute.
Okay. Yes. Hi. My question is, my company is currently writing an internal policy to promote equality between men and women, and this is based on an institutional conservative perspective, where gender only regards and affects the sex received at birth. And I would like to make them include an LGBT perspective, and I would like to focus especially on transgender and transsexual women. So I would like to ask if you have any tips. If you can advise me anyhow, if someone had similar experience before, about including LGBT perspective on actions focused generally on women.
Ann or Harper, do you have any? I mean, Roberto, you had suggested a couple yourself, is suggesting that it's concentrated on men and women who some will happen to be LGBT and T, and I think that's a good intersection that you made, a good point that you made when they discussed the policy, that they're not mutually exclusive, but perhaps some of my colleagues might have something else.
As a policy wonk, this is Harper Jean, I'm afraid I can't speak to this precisely from a corporate context. I know that, at the level of sort of government and policy efforts around gender equality, you do increasingly see that kind of framing and that inclusion of lesbian, bisexual, and trans women in action plans for gender equality. I've seen some things like that come out of the UK and France. For example, I was just at an LGBT rights conference that was, where that was in large part organized by the French Ministry for Women's Equality. And so at the government and policy level, I think in many countries there's an increasing sort of incorporation of that into the discussion of women's and in gender equality, but I'm not so much sure about models in the corporate sphere.
So, I think, this is Ann, in a corporate sense, I think that one of the keys here is to I might do some work with the continuums, right, and showing the continuum of women and how women express themselves as feminine to masculine, and how sexual orientation expresses itself, or people express their sexual orientation from lesbian to gay and everywhere in between. And talking about how if you want to include women, there are all types of women, right? So I think that's how I would approach it, is looking at, starting with that continuum and saying, here's how women express their gender, and their sexual orientation is deeply tied to how they express their gender. And I think that might be helpful if you want to start with creating some awareness so that they will create more inclusive policies.
And I think that's an excellent point, is that gender is expressed in so many ways by women. And Roberta, I know your question was directed regarding women, but we also have to remember there's the other side of the spectrum as well, and that gender expression manifests its ways in many ways in men and women that may happen to be LGBT and T. So hopefully that'll be helpful. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was agreeing with you, yeah.
So we have, I think, time for another question.
So I'm going to unmute Brad. Give me just a second.
On next steps. Thanks.
Yes. So Brad?
Hi, Q. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay. I don't necessarily have a question, but in terms of next steps from our organization, we just earlier this month co-hosted a seminar with Accenture, and Accenture at that time was pleased to announce that they've actually just deployed a specific set of trans health benefits across their company globally. So particularly in Canada, this was a really interesting seminar for a lot of the corporate partners of Pride at Work Canada who attended. Because historically in Canada, I think a lot of the corporations have modeled their healthcare around the provincial healthcare model. And this seminar in particular explored, some of the benefits, but also some of the risks of doing that. And with Accenture's model, it is not based on any provincial healthcare coverage. I believe it's set, there's I think a series of coverages that a particular employee could select. And out of those coverages, I believe it's looking more like a financial view. So for example, you may have the lower end package, which has approximately $75,000 coverage, up to probably a higher end package of $150,000 coverage or something like that. And I think even through the discussion around that, the pros and cons of having caps on benefit coverage, etc., it really stimulated within corporate environment. I would say that the fact that the bar is being raised, certainly in the industry, and is starting to garner some competition amongst the industry participants. So in our organization, we left that seminar, understanding that we are still viewed in Canada as a leader from a trans health benefits perspective, but we are actually going to re-examine our coverage and see if there are some additional steps we can take to again, raise the bar for the rest of the industry in Canada.
Brad, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, and gives us all something to aspire to. I know I didn't know if Daniel wanted to say something. I know we're close to out of time.
Actually, I was going to go ahead and say we'll let Daniel off the hook this go around because we are definitely running. We are right up on time. So we've already done our question and answer section. I'd like to go ahead and get closing comments from you guys, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, I think I'll just go ahead and jump in. This is Kyler. Thank everybody for engaging in this 4-part series. I think Brad has done, or Roberto has done all the sections. I think Brad has done a couple as well, and I appreciate your interest, and hopefully this has been helpful. Thank you.
And this is Ann. I just want to say that I really, again, appreciate your interest. I hope that you will take the new things you learned over these 4 days, and 4 weeks, and I hope there were new things for everybody, and that you'll take those back to your workplace and you'll continue to create meaningful change in your workplace and in your personal lives. And I know that if Jameson were here, that he would be very glad that you all made it through, and would also want you to take back what you learned to be successful. So I'll just speak for Jameson because he's not here. Thank you.
And this is Harper Jean again. I'll just say that, again, speaking as a policy wonk, it's been tremendously beneficial for me just to hear the perspectives of all of the participants and my co-presenters about how this stuff works and what are the issues and what are the best practices and what really happens out there in different workplaces. But that's been really valuable for me, and it's going to be has been very very thought-provoking for me. I'm also starting to think, based on some of the discussion we've had these last few weeks, about how NCTE as a trans organization, how we can sort of update some of our policies to be more proactive about being inclusive of specifically of genderqueer employees.
Thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and thank you for your comments. Let's see, where are we going here? All right. So I want to thank everybody for your participation. Those of you who are on the line, once you close out your screen, you'll be directed to a course survey. Please fill that out. It helps us decide what we're going to do next to offer you more information that you'd like to have. Join us in May for our Developing Allies course and Targeted and Privileged. And of course, if you could, consider being a sponsor or making a donation to Out and Equal. Go to our website for more information. Thank you guys very much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Please stand by.